Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Energy Markets podcast, where each morning we reflect on the market open in Asia. Let's kick off way out there deep in Asia, as far as you can go, I think, really, to Sydney, Australia, with Peter McGuire, CEO of XM Australia. The markets have opened this morning, Peter, a little bit up, nearly 1% up on Brent.
Yes.
After the wobble last month, we've had a pretty strong recovery, and now it seems the markets have plateaued a little bit, again, back in this low 70 point. Where do you think the dynamics are at the moment?
Well, good morning, Sean. Good morning, everyone. I think first off, it's had such a massive move in the last, 6 to 10 trading days, Sean. It really took everyone, I think, by surprise. Huge uptick, probably up the best part of 11 odd percent. So possibly it's exhausted. It's not unusual to see after a big dramatic move like that. It was oversold and then it was possibly to the point of overbought. So it's a little bit of consolidation. Big demand that isn't going away. The numbers coming out of certainly Eurozone and US. So it's been a very strong summer period for consumption. And the storyline is probably every producer is rubbing their hands with glee. And maybe there's another dollar or two in it to the upside in the short term.
Peter, I'm curious to get your perspective, and I know it's a particular view from Sydney, on what's going on in China exactly, with all of these sort of new, every week there's a different sort of narrative. The most recent one sort of clamping down on the movie actors. We had yesterday I think the position is called the treasurer of Australia. Is that the finance secretary? But ultimately, senior treasury executive official in Australia saying that China's political pressure on Australia's economy isn't working. This war of words, this sort of standoff between Canberra and Beijing goes on. What's your take on all of that?
Well, certainly, Sean, the rhetoric has picked up over the last decade or so, and it wasn't a concern very much, I don't believe, in certainly the 80s or the 90s, and it's probably the zeros. But in the last decade, yes, the general, I think since the GFC, we've seen a very solid interest from China across our political landscape. We're also mindful of Victoria, which is the state under Canberra, the capital, and the Belt and Road that they'd signed with the Premier of the state, Premier Andrews, and that was torn up by the Prime Minister. So you can sense the political intrigue there. Also remembering that from an export-driven economy, Western Australia, due to iron ore and coal, we power China to a big percent, and there's really a lot of pressure, I think, on the big miners, how they play that game. So it's very much an argy-bargy. That's a typical Australian term between what we're doing and our treasurer's viewpoints and Beijing. And where I am in Sydney, we're about the 9th week or 10th week into a lockdown. So this is our longest. And I think there's a lot of concern domestically with our economy cratering in small business, that is. And I think that's more the focus at the moment. Our lenses, whilst it might be on China, Sean, it's very much a gaze internally to the fragility of our domestic economy. And that really, I think, is taking center stage.
Scott Morrison finally acknowledged during the week, in the last few days, that the strategy of sort of zero COVID was flawed, and now needing to ramp up vaccinations. Is that generally accepted or welcomed in Australia?
I think that's even a split bag between the haves, or the vax and the anti-vax. I don't think people are necessarily anti-vax, but they're just it really hasn't engulfed our country. It hasn't taken over. And at the present time, there's a large percentage, certainly of young and middle-aged people, that are saying, in different parts, Queensland, for instance, has a very, very low take-up of the vaccination. So, there are different viewpoints all across the nation. This is an incredible country when you're thinking it's the size of Europe, as we all know, if not bigger. and you've got 25 or 26 million people. So it's just extraordinary. There's no one here. And that seems to be the
I'm on my way.
situation.
I will take my 5 million acres. No,
you're more than welcome.
Yeah, we can't get in, but nonetheless, on to more tangible economic issues. You had the jobs number out of the US last week. Just on the headline alone, looked well below expectations. Deeper in the numbers, it looked like still sort of some strong indicators there. How do you interpret it vis-a-vis where Fed and monetary policy goes from here?
Well, building on, and that's exactly right, Sean, I'm building on Vandana's point as far as those weaker, well, the stronger PMIs, but I think the reality of the matter, which led us into a bit of a checkup from the neck up, was those Michigan numbers, the sentiment index, and since 1978, it's been about 515 odd months of data. We had 1%, so it was the worst number in that 515 month period since 1978. So that's giving us an indication, 13.4% down in July of the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index. And that just demonstrates the fragility, which in turn wraps around your point as far as the underwhelming number that we had analysts, some were saying 900, 950,000. General consensus was about 740, 760,000, came in at about 250,000. So it was 500,000 shy on the NFP number Friday, which I think hit everyone between the eyes, just demonstrating that. And again, over a summer period, you would have thought it could have been a bit stronger. So there's the first part. The second part, if I use this as a wake-up call, we've just got the notes through from our RBA. They met this afternoon, or your morning time in Dubai, Reserve Bank of Australia, and they're pedaling back on taper from 5 billion to 4 billion a week. But they've come out, Sean, and said that they won't have a rate rise until at least 24. So there's the first part. And then they'll continue those purchases up until at least mid-February of next year. So if we're saying that the Fed's going to offer a similar mindset to what our RBA is doing, it'll be a taper talk by end of year, how much they take off the table, and then who's the first one to jump as far as rate rise.
It seems like only a few weeks ago we were talking about our New Zealand going to increase rates by 1/4 or 0.5%.
That's right.
Now it's like, are we even going to start tapering before the US election cycle starts? And I think we have to bring into the thinking the possibility that there will actually be no taper if they don't jump through that window pretty soon.
Can I ask you a quick question? What do you think of these high oil prices, not oil prices, gas prices, primarily energy prices in general in Europe, which seem to have reached a peak or a record of some kind recently? I'd sort of be curious to hear what my
you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to go to Peter with that, and let's get the survey result and then go to Peter on that point. Obviously, Asia, a massive gas importer, LNG market. We're seeing before the winter, obviously Australia, a big LNG producer. We're seeing these record gas prices. What's your outlook for that? The impact it may have, positive or negative?
Sure, naturally, it gets to a point in time that the consumer gets impacted in the purse and the wallet, and we're experiencing that now, certainly in Australia, as far as inflation, and we're hearing the same sort of numbers coming out of course, Eurozone with 3% as quoted, and with what's happening across generally Asia and the US. So that's going to be the handbrake. How much can people bear from a pain perspective? I know that I talk to India frequently, and they're certainly having all sorts of problems over there from a affordability aspect, and then all of those inflationary issues coming off from higher energy prices. So that's the concern, I think, on Main Street, and that's going to be a hurdle that is going to be a hard one to jump.
Thank you, Peter from Sydney, and David, as always, great to have your thoughts and insights. Really appreciate it. Have a great day, everybody. We'll catch up every morning, 10:30 UAE time. All the best.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers, Sean.